will remain an incident commander in the early stages of a fire, even in those early stages, that fire turned out to be serious and extensive.
It can be, depending on how the resources can get to the incident ground, yes.
Yeah. Could you just help me explain the difference between Watch Manager A and Watch Manager B?
The sole difference is the personnel that you're in charge of and also the number of appliances. So for a Watch Manager A...
So, sorry, just pause a moment.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry. I seem to have got feedback. Maybe me, I don't know.
So for Watch Manager A, you will be in charge of a one appliance station. And if for Watch Manager B, you'll be in charge of two fire engines or more, or a multiple appliance station. And obviously, you'll be in charge of more personnel as well. So the only real difference is, in terms of on the fire ground, we have the same role, the same sort of, as it's a commander, but it's just at station-based level, you'll be in charge of, as a Watch Manager B, two or more appliances. Watch Manager A, you'll be at a single appliance station.
Right. So, would I be right in thinking that a Watch Manager B is a more responsible role going to the more experienced firefighter?
Not on the fire ground, no.
Not on the fire ground?
On the fire ground, Watch Manager A and Watch Manager B will have the same responsibilities on the fire ground.
Right. And you mentioned Red Watch. Could you just explain the different colours?
Yeah, so within London Fire Brigade, we have 4 watches. So we have Red Watch, which I'm currently on. We have Blue Watch, White Watch and Green Watch. So at any one time, during the night period or the daytime period, one of those watches will be on duty.
Right. And is there any difference in functions between the different colours of watch?
No, not at all. It's just a way of managing the watches. There's no different functionality between any of those watches. They all have, any one station, they have the same skills on any one of those watches. Yeah.
Right. Because in your career, you say you joined a lot of red watches.
No, I've been on different watches.
You've been on different watches?
Yeah, I've been blue, red, green throughout my career in London Fire Brigade.
Right. Now, you say in your statement, at the bottom of page 1, I am classed as competent in my role as watch manager.
That's correct.
Could you explain what being classed as competent means?
For any phase of your career as a firefighter in London Fire Brigade, whether that be from being a firefighter, watch manager, station manager, you have to pass what we call the development phase. And that is facilitated over a period of time where you have to sort of prove through evidence, whether that's submitted evidence, direct observation, and that's facilitated through something called electronic personal development record, which basically allows the authority to document that over a period of time you have proved that you are competent within your role to be promoted to a substantive either firefighter, crew manager or watch manager level.
Are there any other classes of ability other than competent?
You also can assume the role temporary. So if you're a firefighter that had aspirations to become an officer in the future, or again a crew manager who want to further their officer role, then we have something that's classed as temporary, where you take up that position on a temporary basis. So you're not proved as competent, but you are a temporary in that temporary role.
And when were you last classed as competent?
My last would have been when I joined the Watch Manager B scheme. From Watch Manager A to Watch Manager B, I got promoted, and that would be the last time I was proved competent. Yeah.
And when was that?
That would be in February 2015.
And can you explain what training to be a watch manager involves?
When you initially get promoted from any role, but from a crew manager to watch manager role, go into a development phase, and within that development phase you'll have an initial instant command course. When I got promoted to my watch manager role, that was facilitated at the Fire Service College, and that you went out there for a week, which is up in Morton in the Marsh, and you run through a range of incidents and test your ability to operate at a watch manager level. So then you come back from that week of your input at the Fire Service College, and then following that you would have a number of, we call it sort of block options, and that will be how to manage teams, manage performance, sort of a bit more how to run a fire station, if I'm honest, and that's all on the back of before you go into your development stage, once you've done those courses, then you have to go on to this development phase of your promotion to prove your competency within the role.
Right. And who delivers the initial watch manager training?
The London Fire Brigade deliver that. That has changed. When I for my promotion, it was the London Fire Brigade facilitating internally its own training. Since then, we have outsourced that to Babcock. And they now Babcock do all our training. So that's officer training, firefighter training, refresher training.
Right. And you say in your statement that you did a refresher course every 2 years.
Yeah.
Who delivered that?
That's correct. Again, that's facilitated centrally from the London Fire Brigade Training Department, and it's called the Supervisory Management Instant Refresher Course. When that has slightly changed its flavour over the last couple of years. We used to go to Fire Service College, but now that Babcock provide our training, we do that at sites internally in London Fire Brigade, and that was facilitated generally through the command refresher courses. That's at Harrow Fire Station. They've got a training centre there, and that's done by a simulation. So it's sort of you go into a room and you'll be given different scenarios on a computer-based training package.
Right. And okay. And your most recent refresher course prior to the Grenfell Tower fire, when was that?
I wouldn't be able to give you specific on a date. I wouldn't be able to answer that question, unfortunately. It would have been certainly within a minimum of a 2-year period before Grenfell Tower, because that's the minimum time. Every 2 years you have to have a refresher course on that.
So after you joined Red Watch at North Kensington?
I would have had one between the time I joined in 2015, I would presume, to the fire on the 14th of June.
And was that refresher training based on a standardised course?
Yes.
Do you know who designed the course?
No, I don't.
Is there a handbook or a guide that you used when you did the training?
I can't remember a handbook. You get sent through what we call joining instructions. Within there's some course details, relevant policies and procedures that you may need for this course. But I can't remember being given any sort of handbook.
Did the refresher course that you did post February 15 involve high-rise firefighting?
I think the last one I did was it was based at Harrow, so it was this computer-based training package, and I think I did go through a high-rise based scenario, yes.
And how would you have done that? You say it's computer-based, so
yes,
just talk me through that bit of the training.
Walk into a room, and they have a big screen in front of you, and you have a trainer, and basically the trainer will facilitate different roles, and they have the facility to input different images. It's a moving package, so it's a live package, and they can put residents, they can put fire spread, they can put officers, and there's no audio. The trainer that is with you in the incident ground in the pod will facilitate those roles, and you will have other officers in the room as well who may facilitate other roles, take messages, draw timelines on the whiteboard that's in the room as well.
You mentioned computer-facilitated images, and you mentioned also fire spread.
Yeah.
Can you remember what the training involved so far as concerned fire spread?
Not the specifics, no. It will give you the tools to be able to sort of walk through and guide yourself through an escalating incident of some description. Not just based on high-rise. It could be RTC, hazmat incident, different types of building fires, compartment fires, different transport incidents.
Right. Just being a little bit slower there.
Yep.
RTC.
So, beg your pardon, road traffic collisions.
Road traffic collision. And hazmat, I think I can understand.
Hazardous materials.
Right.
So any incident that involves hazardous material, yeah.
Thank you. And what specific training did you ever receive for the role of incident commander, if any?
Again, that would be facilitated through initially when you go from firefighter to crew manager. There's a big change in what you have to train to do in terms of from a firefighter to an officer. So you, again, through the different options prior to your development stage, you were given input and instant command, and I referenced that back into instant command policy. And at the time, when I went from firefighter to crew manager, the training was still run out of Southwark Training Centre, and there was an instant command training team at that time.
Right. You mentioned policies. I am going to ask you some detailed questions about policies later. But can I ask you now whether you're familiar, or you were trained to be familiar, with certain standing policies of the LFB? Did your training or refresher course cover LFB policy 431, which is about incident command? And we
Yes.
can put if we put it up on the screen, I'll give the reference. It's tab 11 of the policies bundle, and it's LFB 36048. If we could just have the first page, just to refresh your memory, Mr. Dowden.
I mean, we, from memory, don't have the policies to hand in the refresher training, but they would have referred to that policy, yes.
Right. So can I take it that you were familiar from your training with the contents of this policy?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And what about policy number 238, which is incident command procedures, which is tab 1? And just for the record, it's FB 50164. That's policy 238 there on the screen, Mr. Dowden. Were you familiar with that as well?
Yes.
Right. I'm going to come back to those. I just wanted to make sure you knew what I was talking about. That's very helpful. Can I turn to the topic of high-rise firefighting? As at June 2017, how would you describe your knowledge and experience of high-rise firefighting policy?
I think I've got a fairly robust and good understanding of the policy itself, yes.
Okay. As at June 2017, had you ever heard of generic risk assessment, of GRA 3.2, published by the government in February 2014?
No, I haven't.
See if you could identify it as a document. Could you please throw up on the screen, Mr. Trial Director, that policy, which I think is tab 6. Sorry, tab 7. It's LFB 0001255. So there it is on the screen, Mr. Dowden. I know you say you haven't heard of it. This might refresh your memory. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Have you ever seen this document?
Not pre-June 2017, no.
Have you seen it since?
Yes.
When have you seen it? When do you see it after June 17?
The last time I saw that was a couple of weeks ago at an incident commander's briefing.
An incident commander's briefing?
Yes.
A couple of weeks ago?
Yes.
Where was that?
That was at Union Street.
At Union Street?
Yes.
Who gave the briefing?
It was facilitated by Gary Rizal.
What's his role?
He is helping the LFB internally in terms of the Grenfell Tower investigation.
I see. And who was that briefing given to?
It was to the incident commanders and the key decision makers of the Grenfell Tower.
I see. And did you play a part in that briefing? Did you play a part in that briefing?
Yes.
Do you know whether there is a report or any documents which show what happened at that briefing?
I don't know.
You don't? Okay. If I wanted to find out what had happened at that briefing, who would I ask?
I would presume Gary Rizal.
Right. And I'm sorry, his name should be familiar to me, but it isn't. But is it reason as in reason?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Thank you. I am going to ask some questions about this policy, Mr. Dowden, but if you don't know the answer, then tell me. Can I ask you please first to turn to page 8 of this document? Internally, page 8, which is page 10 in the relativity reference. And look, please, first of all, at the red title or heading halfway down, construction technique. Any building under construction may provide additional hazards as partitions, doors or fire protection measures may not yet be installed. Timber frame construction can be vulnerable to rapid fire spread or collapse during the construction phase. And then it says this: combustible material in voids and cavities and poor quality construction can also contribute to the spread of fire and smoke beyond the compartment of origin. Having shown you that, my question is, were you aware that this statement was part of policy?
No.
No. Were you trained in your training as watch manager and incident command procedures to be aware that combustible material in voids and cavities and poor quality construction can also contribute to the spread of fire and smoke beyond the compartment of origin? Were you trained to look for that?
I've been trained to look for signs and symptoms of smoke spread and, you know, fire coming out of the compartment and breaching the compartment of origin. In the high-rise policies, I know it internally in London Fire Brigade, but I've not seen it in that document in that format before. No.
All right. Well, we'll come back to that in documents that you might be more familiar with as we go through. Could you please next turn to page 11 internally? Well, actually, before I do, sorry, page 9, the next page. I'll just pick this up with you if I can as we go through. Just below halfway down, you'll see a heading in black, fire behaviour and development, and underneath that in red capitals, fire and smoke spread. Fire and smoke in high-rise buildings can spread in an upward, downward or horizontal direction, and this may be more rapid and less predictable than in other building types. The question is, were you aware that that was part of policy?
Yes.
And were you trained to look for that?
I would say yes.
And what did that training involve?
If I'm honest, it's probably, that will be facilitated more so through a theory session for us at a station-based level to, for me as an incident commander particularly, to look at that and reference that in policy. There's no, I understand that I haven't been given any sort of practical training in terms of action. It's more of a sort of a theory-based session in terms of how your tactics would, how you tactically control that if that happened.
Tell me a little bit more about the theory. What theory were you trained to apply?
I mean, from what I can remember, reference in our policy, internal LFB policy, is that that can happen, and generally, if a fire breaks out of a compartment, and this is not just specific to high-rise, then we would use something called a covering jet, but it does reference in our high-rise policy that, you know, use of a monitor to sort of try and stop the spread of external fire spread on a high-rise building, but I've never done that and never actually facilitated that in a practical training session.
So the theory, is this fair, that your takeaway from the theory training you had was that where there is fire and smoke spread in high-rise buildings, which breaks out of the compartment, you would apply a ground monitor and fight the fire from the exterior? So, training.
If it's not uncommon, and I have been in a couple of instances where fire has broken out of the compartment, and it does happen where the fire may travel 1, 2, 3 floors. So the expectation is also that we fight that internally, so we can fight fire internally to the external.
Well, we're going to come back to that, and I'm sure you can imagine it later on. Let's just go through this policy a little bit more. And could you please turn to page 11 internally? And at the head of the page, top of the page, it says Firefighting and Rescue Operations. And just a quarter of the way down, it says Evacuation of Buildings in capital letters in red there. And I just want to show you the third paragraph down, which says, in addition, the occupants may not be aware. Can you see that? In addition, the occupants may not be aware of the building's evacuation strategy, or in the case of many residential buildings, a stay-put policy may be in place. This is based on the concept of secure compartmentation of fires. Just pausing there, again, was that part of policy something you were trained to be aware of?
Yes, I was aware of the state policy and reference to compartmentation, yes.
What did the stay-put policy mean to you?
The stay-put policy, from my interpretation, is it's difficult. I don't see it as a policy. I understand it's more of a strategy. It's more of the LFP don't have a policy on it. It's something to be born out of the way a building should behave in a fire. Now, generally, if we get a fire within a high-rise building, a flat, we have a certain amount of time, 60 minutes in terms of that compartmentation, and it should contain that fire within that compartmentation. The policy refers to that if that individual can leave the property and their flat is on fire, by all means it's safe to do so, leave the property, and also the people on that floor. People below or above that compartmentation or that flat should be safe enough to remain within their property and not be affected by the products of smoke, heat or fire travel. That will only ever change if the flats or the communal areas will become involved in fire, heat or smoke travel, and then would be advised to leave their property if it is safe to do so.
Okay, thank you very much. I understand that. We're going to examine, I think, that understanding you had later on, try and unpack it a bit. But for the time being, let's leave that where it is. Mr. Dowden, can we just look together at the next paragraph? Incident commanders must consider both the effect of firefighting tactics on the evacuation of occupants and, conversely, the effect of evacuation on tactics. If, for example, and I'll read the whole paragraph, if, for example, a building's evacuation plan includes the use of lifts by occupants, there may be an impact on the availability of fire lifts for use by fire and rescue personnel. And then this, the need to assist with the evacuation of occupants can divert personnel away from the tasks that they were briefed to undertake. This can have an adverse effect on the incident commander's plan and resourcing for the incident. Now, there's a lot of information in that paragraph, but my question is a simple one. Were you aware, as of June 2017, that the matters set out there were part of national firefighting policy?
Yes.
And next question, were you trained at all in how to understand and apply what is in that policy?
Yeah, I would have, again, reference it to the Farmgate policy. There is a theory on that, how we can facilitate evacuation of residents, yes.
And what was the theory in which you were trained?
It depends on the building. So generally, if we need to evacuate residents, the ideal thing in a high-rise block would be to have two staircases. So we can facilitate, one as a rescue staircase and one as a firefighting staircase. In the case of somewhere like Grenfell Tower, that only had one communal staircase. And as you can imagine, it would be very difficult to facilitate evacuating residents when we've got firefighters and equipment going up the same staircase as well. And that references back into the statement policy why that will be implemented.
Did you receive any practical training on how to consider the effects of firefighting tactics on the evacuation of occupants?
Not in terms of practical application, no.
And what about the other way around? Practical training on the effect of evacuation on tactics? Did you get any practical training on that?
No, it's more of a, for me, as an incident commander, it would be a discussion at a local level, a watch-based level, in terms of how that would be facilitated. You may, it can be facilitated. We spoke about it before when we go to what we call familiarisation visits, and that's something that you may talk about is, okay, if there's a double staircase, single staircase, and that's when you again have a good discussion at these familiarisation visits in terms of how to facilitate that sort of rescue operation.
Okay, thank you. We'll again probably come back to that in a little bit more detail later on. If you could please then turn to page 19, internally of this document. We will go back and look at earlier pages when we come to the topics on them, but just on training at the moment, I want to ask you about the last quarter of this page, starting with the word training at the bottom there. Training which will cover high-rise incidents must include, and then do you see there are some bullet points? I just want to ask you about the first and second bullet point. The first bullet point says, high-rise incidents must include the development of knowledge, skills and understanding for firefighters on the impact of fire on the building's construction, layout, contents and occupant behaviour. And my question is, did you receive training on those matters?
Again, no sort of practical input. It would more be facilitated from me at local level station to reference that through policy. And then again, when we are out on high-rise blocks in particular, and facilitate a familiarisation visit.
Right. Okay, I'm sorry about this, Mr. Dowden, and I may be repeating the
Yes.
question over and over again, just from slightly different angles, but can you give me an idea of how, or rather what, the theoretical training on those matters, the development of knowledge, skills and understanding about the impact of fire on the building's construction, layout and contents and occupant behaviour, what was the theoretical content of the training you got?
I think it will come into playing a couple of policies in terms of the building construction. That we facilitate maybe within a familiarisation visit again.
Right.
Looking at the construction of the building, what it's built of, layout. Again, that will be facilitated through a familiarisation visit. Occupant behaviour. I don't know if there's sort of any real training on occupant behaviour. That's something that you would have to preempt as an instant commander, I suppose, from previous experience.
Unpacking that a bit more, how did you get taught to understand the building's construction and layout and contents?
You don't really talk about specific individual buildings. It's more of a reference back into policy and more of a generic overview of these are the things to look out for when you're in these buildings. And that's just not referencing to high-rise, that's any sort of familiarisation visit we do. If there's any special methods of construction that potentially could aid fire spread, if they're involved in fire, how that would, if they could fail. There's no sort of real practical training in terms of how you apply that.
I see. So, of any particular building, what would you be taught to look for specifically of a high-rise building in relation to its construction and layout?
I wouldn't say you're taught to look for anything in terms of construction of a high-rise. It's more, for me as an ex-commander of firefighters, how we respond operationally, equipment, tackling the fire, resourcing. I suppose the only way, again, that could be facilitated through these familiarisation visits, and we do have different systems and process within the fire brigade that can help us document that.
Right. I mean, were you taught to look at any particular building's construction or layout in detail, or were you just left to your own devices on these familiarisation visits?
Yeah, you don't. as a watch officer, watch manager, that's down to for you to facilitate going to these buildings and through policy reference it and from your understanding of what that building was constructed, is it going to be of an issue to firefighters tackling fires? But I don't recall if I've had any sort of specific training in terms of barring reference back to policy.
Looking at the next bullet point down, effective call handling and management of any fire survival guidance calls. This includes the recording, passing and acting on information from control to the incident. Did you receive training in those matters?
Me, there is a policy to cover that, and again, it's not something that's centrally done by the London Fire Brigade. That will be down to the officers of a fire station to facilitate training of a particular policy to reference that bullet point.
Yeah, but did you get training in those matters?
No.
You didn't?
I facilitate the training at my local level, at station-based level.
So you give the training?
Yes.
Have you had any training on how to give the training?
No.
Right. So how do you know what to teach people?
Through past experiences, research on the policy.
And is that, to your knowledge, general across the London Fire Brigade?
Yes.
Right.
When you're a watch officer, the expectation is you have that knowledge, that experience to be able to provide training, but we aren't as such given a basis of how to train. That's your expectation when you're an officer.
All right. Well, we'll come back to that again. So many of these questions I'm asking you at the moment when we look at specific policies in the context of specific events. Can I ask you next, please, to turn to page 20? And right in the middle of the page, you'll see a list of bullet points there. I should just tell you that this is the follow-on from the bullet points we were looking at earlier. So this is about training and what it must include. And if you look in the middle of the page 20, at the fourth bullet point up from the end, can you see it says evacuation and casualty removal tactics. Incident commanders building where a stay-put policy is normally in place. My question is, did you receive any training in those matters?
Me as a watch officer, no. But again, it's something that is the expectation through policy that we should have an understanding of how to train at a local level, watch-based level, and how to apply that in an operational scenario.
So you weren't trained in those matters, but you were expected to draw on your experience to pass on those matters, evacuation and casualty removal tactics, to your men. And is that how it worked?
And that experience will come from previous training, policy, or from operational experience. That's correct, yeah.
And is the training that you pass on in those matters, I'm being specific, evacuation and casualty removal tactics, is the training that you pass on put together formally by you?
No, there is no stay-put policy. London Fire Brigade don't have a stay-put policy. The reference to that would be our own internal high-rise firefighting policy, where there'll be reference to that. But there is no formal training package, computer-based training package on the stay-put policy, because it doesn't exist.
Okay. But just looking at the matters in this bullet point, which national policy says must be covered by training, when you're training your men, do you do it from a document or some materials that you've prepared?
It will be from a prepared training package or policy from the London Fire Brigade.
Oh, I see. So the London Fire Brigade prepare the training and then you deliver it? Is that how
so
it works?
I may not necessarily go through from start to finish with the policy, because what I will do is in this sort of the theory session is we have a whiteboard and we'll go through how we would on arrival tactics at a high-rise incident. Again, on familiarisation visits, just when we're there, just have a conversation with the firefighters. Okay, if we were to have an incident at this tower block, or even if it wasn't a tower block, could we do familiarisation visits on a number of risks and premises within the London Fire Brigade? But yeah, That's how that would be facilitated.
Okay. So just so I understand it, in terms of the training on the matters that are covered in this bullet point, Mr. Dowden, I think what you're saying to me, correct me if I've got this wrong, is that you're not trained yourself, but you deliver training to your men through a package that's designed by the London Fire Brigade.
Not just to men, to my firefighters, yes.
Yeah, yes,
yeah.
That's what forgive me, quite right, absolutely. And that's done on a whiteboard. Is there any practical training that you deliver to your firefighters on those matters?
If I'm honest, I don't think it's something that I personally did with practical. We did do, which was facilitated in February 2016, which was an area training package that was facilitated at Hammersmith Fire Station, where there was three sort of strands to it. There was a practical high-rise drill, which facilitated at Hammersmith Fire Station. We do have sort of what we call training towers. We don't have anything that replicates a high-rise building where we can actually train on in the London Fire Brigade. Then we did what we call a tactical decision exercise, where I was the commander, and again you sort of put through a different series of questions and put under pressure. I was in rooms, there were different roles being facilitated by watch members, whether that would be firefighters, people on the bridgehead, and the trainers would again facilitate different roles, whether they were responsible people of the building, residents, casualties. So yeah, that's the experience I've sort of had in terms of referencing to that point.
Just before I leave this bullet point and coming back to it, it says that incident commanders should understand when a partial or full evacuation strategy might become necessary in a residential building where a staple policy is normally in place. So this is directed at what an incident commander should understand. And just so that I've got it, what training did you ever receive as an incident commander in how you understand those matters?
As an incident commander, I can't remember any time that I'd actually been on a training course that would facilitate that.
Can I just, did anyone give you any help or advice in understanding when it might be necessary to have a full evacuation? Things to look out for? Or was it just down to your personal experience?
I don't think I've ever had an input from any individual. The only way I could relate to that is, again, referencing it back into our own internal high-rise policy, particularly maybe around, when compartmentation fails, etc. But I don't think I've been trying to describe it in terms of in a training environment where that's been referenced to.
Thank you.
Mr. Dowden, did you ever receive any training in the evacuation of people from high floors in high-rise blocks who might have mobility difficulties?
Again, not for a practical application, that would just be through a theory-based scenario in terms of, it's not in residential buildings, that's only in commercial premises.
What about the elderly or children?
There's no, I don't think in our policy refers to, it doesn't make any differentiation between elderly or young children, young people.
So just so that I'm really clear, and I'm sorry to repeat the question, is the answer to my question no, that you didn't receive training in the evacuation of high floors in high-rise blocks?
I mean, it certainly would be a consideration as an incident commander. Non-ambulant residents, whether they have any disabilities or due to illness or age, or see younger people, it's going to be slightly different to a sort of an able-bodied or an adult person with no disabilities or illness.
Consideration.
Yes.
Did you ever receive any specific training on how people from high floors in high-rise blocks who had mobility difficulties?
Not that I can recall, no.
And the same would apply to the elderly and to children, would it?
Yeah, not.
Can I ask you then? I'm going to ask you to look with me together at the top of this page, which has 3 paragraphs. And I'm going to ask you about the second paragraph, but I need you to look with me, please, at the first and the third. The first paragraph says, the responsible person, which is a defined term, for these premises types needs also to comply with the provisions of the regulatory reform 5, and if necessary have a suitable emergency evacuation plan, a management strategy and maintenance procedures in place identified through their fire risk assessment process. So that's the context. But just pick up the word suitable emergency evacuation plan, and then it says the incident commander should follow the evacuation plan devised as part of the premises fire risk assessment when known, unless the fire situation dictates otherwise. And then it says, where a stay-put policy is in place, it should be safe for occupants to remain within their own property. In the event of a fire elsewhere in the building, occupants, if they are able to, should self-evacuate when the fire, heat or smoke is adversely affecting them in their property. This may be as the result of a fire that has started in their own property or from elsewhere in the building. And then the third paragraph says, it should be noted that not all high-rise residential buildings are designed or have been maintained to have a stay-put policy in place. Now, I've read a great big chunk of text to you aloud so that you understand it. My question is more focused. If we look together at the words in the second paragraph, the incident commander should follow the evacuation plan devised as part of the premises fire risk assessment when known, unless the fire situation dictates otherwise. I just want to look at that sentence. And my question there is, did you ever receive any training as an incident commander as to how to follow the evacuation plan devised as part of the premises fire risk assessment?
Not that I can recall, no.
No. Were you aware that policy required you to have such training?
I am aware it is referenced in policy, but I mean, this would, again, something like that would maybe only come to light when you visit these premises, and if you speak to a responsible person. Something like that would maybe only come to light when you visit these premises, and if you speak to a responsible person. And from my understanding, that most high-rise blocks would implement that stay-put policy. The only time that changes, I believe, is if it would be sheltered accommodation. Reference it back maybe to the last 2 questions ago, if that was sort of elderly people's homes or sheltered accommodations, if there was vulnerable people in there.
It sounds as if, and I'd like you to, it sounds as if you were taught a lot about what the policy contains, but weren't trained specifically parts of the policy, certainly the parts we've been looking at. Would that be fair?
I'd say it's a fair comment, and it is difficult because, as I say, we don't have a high-rise facility to train on to do that. The only time you can ever do that is to use an existing premise, and that is obviously quite difficult because they're generally populated, and to facilitate that, that's something that we don't do.
Right. And just so that I've got it, I think you have answered my question, but I'm sorry if I sound like I'm repeating it. Looking at that first sentence, the incident commander should follow the evacuation plan devised as part of the premises fire risk assessment when known, were you trained in what you should do to follow this policy as an IC, an incident commander, at an incident?
The only way as an incident commander you could follow that is if they had a certain system in place, which is something called a premises information box, where potentially that may be present. So if it does have a premises fire risk assessment that has been undertaken by a responsible person of that, whoever owns that block, whether it's a housing association, a local authority or a private landlord, then as my understanding as an incident commander and watch officer, then that would be in something called a premises information box, which we as London Fire Brigade would have access to on scene.
I see. We'll come back to that, but that's very helpful, thank you. Can I ask you then please to turn to page 30 internally of this same document, and you'll see there a heading in bold, building design and fire safety measures. And I'll just read aloud to you the first paragraph and then show you two other paragraphs. During a fire, the level of risk can be significantly increased if any of the building's design features are compromised or are not in place because the building is under construction or refurbishment. And then it says, early unexpected failure or non-existence of internal compartmentation within a flat can cause a fire to be far bigger than normally planned for. My question, Mr. Dowden, is were you trained to look out for early unexpected failure of internal compartmentation?
My only reference to that in terms of training would be when stepping outside of, before I was an officer, facilitating that either when I was being given training by my officers, referencing it back into the relevant policies that within London Fire Brigade that would refer to.
And doing the best you can, what is it that you were trained to look out for in terms of early unexpected failure of internal compartmentation? What were you trained to look for?
So that would be sort of observing any signs or symptoms of smoke or fire present outside the original compartment. Again, from sort of looking at an incident commander's point of view, putting in procedures in place to facilitate what we call a 360, so to look for any other signs of, rather than where your position as incident commander, having a visual on the full outside of the building, so you've got an understanding of how this fire is behaving internally.
And looking at the fifth paragraph down on this page, so 3 on from the one we've just been looking at together, it says, the incident commander must consider the impact of building materials and contents on fire spread. For example, some designs of plastic or aluminium window frames or panels can be subject to early failure, promoting fire growth and vertical and horizontal fire spread. Just looking at that, my question is, were you ever trained in those matters?
It's difficult to say I've actually received training on that, but that would become hopefully apparent if that information was surrendered to us when we undertook familiarisation visits.
You say it would become apparent on a familiarisation visit. Did anybody ever train you as to what to look for in respect of the impact of building materials and contents on fire spread when doing familiarisation visits?
Not that I can recall, no.
So, as an incident commander, either on a familiarisation visit or at a fire, how would you go about considering the impact of building materials and contents on fire spread?
Could you repeat that question, please?
Yes. When you were an incident commander, either doing a familiarisation visit or at a fire, an actual fire, how would you go about considering the impact of building materials and contents on fire spread?
It would be very much in terms of what you can visually see in terms of how that fire spread, if you were getting communications from some crews, from other officers on the fire ground, that's your information sources. Yeah, so you're looking at visual, different pieces of information from other crews working within the building. That's generally as an incident commander where you'll get your information from.
Let me dig a little deeper. If you look at the next part of that paragraph, it says, for example, some designs of plastic or aluminium window frames or panels can be subject to early failure, promoting fire growth and vertical and horizontal fire spread. How were you trained to know which designs of plastic or aluminium windows or panels would be subject to early failure and which wouldn't?
I don't recall receiving any training on that specifically.
Right. Can you go back, please, then to page 20 in the same policy? And there you'll see in red, 2/3 of the way down the page, command and control at incidents. The incident commander must follow the principles of the current. And then going over the page, that just gives you what this bit's about. But if you go over the page, the top of page 21, I'll just read the paragraph to you. It's short. It says, the incident commander should review and change their plan whenever new information becomes available at the incident or from fire control. It is vital that the incident commander makes effective use of the sector and functional commanders to implement their plan, minimise spans of control and prevent personal information overload. Now, the first question is, were you trained ever in what you should do to follow this policy as an incident commander at an incident?
The only reference I can make to that is specific policy, and it's called the decision-making model. And that's something, as an officer, you will have a lot of input in. It's a policy itself. It goes through a sort of flowchart process in terms of specific information relating to the task or event, in terms of what we're turning up to, resources, and also information on risk and benefit. And it takes you through a very sort of a strategic flowchart of how to initially formulate a plan, if any new information comes to light, and how you re-evaluate that plan, how you communicate it. So in terms of, that's my understanding of the decision-making model would assist incident commanders to in that paragraph.
Right. That's very helpful. Just so we can be clear, can I ask you to be shown tab 13 of the policies bundle, which is the decision-making model, or rather was the one current as of November 2014. I'll just wait for it to come up on the screen. And it's LFB quintuple 0, so 5 zeros, 238. And this is LFB policy 341. Is this the model that you were referring to, Mr. Dowden?
That's correct.
And you refer to a flowchart. Can you please be shown page 2 of this document? Is that what you were referring to?
That's correct.
And I think there's one at page 3 as well, and in fact on, through the document. Gathering and thinking at page 4, information about the task or event, page 5, information about available resources, page 6, and so on. Lots of flowcharts. Is that what you were
That's correct.
referring to? Right. So coming back then, thank you, I think we can close that document down and go back to page 21, please, within tab 7, which is the GRA, coming back to the top of page 21, the incident commander should review and change their plan. You say you did get training in that, and that was training in policy 341 we've just looked at.
So that would be your initial input as an incident commander, but also that will be, I'd have to facilitate that at a more local level for myself, a watch-based level, a station-based level.
Just looking then at this paragraph at the top of page 21, the incident commander should review and change their plan whenever new information becomes available at the incident or from fire control. Can you give us an idea of what kind of new information at an incident would require you as an incident commander to review and change your plan?
Reports of persons involved, reports of any hazardous materials, whether that's chemicals, cylinders, any risks to firefighters, potential building collapse, signs or symptoms of fire, smoke spread. Anything that from incident commander needs to know, whether that's going to increase further resourcing.
So persons reported and fire and smoke spread, two of the flags. Would this be fair? Two flags that would alert you as an incident commander to review and change your plan?
If I didn't have that on arrival or as a first piece of information, that's certainly something I'd have to review as an incident commander to change my plan,
Right. And what about evidence of failure of compartmentation? Would that be something that would cause you to review and change your plan?
Yeah.
Yes. And what were you trained to do as an incident commander if any of those happened? Persons reported, fire and smoke spread, failure of compartmentation.
It changes your priority. London Fire Brigade, the priority is to save life. That's our number one priority. So we look at there's a life, fire and hazard. So the number one priority is life. Then we look at the fire, then any other hazards that may be or process within that premise. So if I got new information that people were involved, then that's my number one priority, and that's where I need to sort of direct my resources to and my focus to in that incident.
Thank you. We can now, at least for the time being, close that policy and go to the next one, which is high-rise firefighting. And that's policy LFB 633, which you'll find in tab 4, and it's LFB 50178. And Mr. Dowden, there it is on the screen. This is no, that's the wrong one. Mr. Dowden, will you give me a moment? It's 1256, Mr. Trial Director. We put the wrong version of that on the screen. It's 1256. So LFB 0001256. Yes, that's the one. That's the one reviewed as current at the 1st of June 2015, and as we understand it, Mr. Dowden, that's the one that was current as at June 2017. My question is, as at June 2017, were you familiar with this policy?
Yes, I was.
Prior to the 14th of June 2017, did you have any training on this policy?
Yes.
How often did you have training on this policy, do you think? Do you remember?
Not in terms of individual dates and specifics. As I spoke to before, we can reference that in terms of a theory session at a station-based level where we sort of talk about en route and on-arrival tactics for high-rise premises. I spoke about in February 2016 we had a sort of full day of practical and tactical decision exercise which was facilitated at Hammersmith Fire Station. But that will be incorporated into something we call our core skills training. And that is just one very small part of our training that we have to adopt at a local level at station.
Right. So February 16, you said, you had a full day of practical and tactical decision exercise facilitated at Hammersmith Fire Station.
Yes.
I'm going to come back just to that in a moment. Can I ask you to look at your training records, which the LFB have very kindly put together for us? This you will find in it's a bundle of documents, tab 9, and the relativity number. It's a very long spreadsheet. It doesn't just apply to you. The relativity reference, Mr. Trial Director, is LFB quadruple 03571, and your training starts, in terms of where it is on this spreadsheet, at page 3 and goes back to 2012. It's in reverse order. Can I ask you just to note that at the foot of each page on the right, you should have a page number.
Can you read that on the screen?
Not very, no.
No, I didn't think you could. Which particular part of the...
Well, we're going to start with what ought to be page 25, which should have an entry for the 23rd of March 2017. It isn't terribly clear.
Is that the one you wanted?
Yes. And if you look at the 23rd of March 2017, we think that's the last one before the fire on the 14th of June in terms of firefighting in high-rise buildings policy 633 that you had, Mr. Dowden. Now it says that if you look across the page, it's theoretical station-based training. First of all, do you remember independently what training you had in late March 2017 on policy 633?
I won't be able to recall the actual specifics in terms of what the session entailed, but I know there was. I will get to the answer I want to say. Prior to Grenfell, about April, 6 weeks prior to it, we had a high-rise fire in Trellick Tower, and I know that it's not in my training diary, but I know it certainly has been referenced in my firefighters and my junior officers that about 2 weeks before, that was my last memory of having an input in high-rise firefighting. It's not in my training record though, so whether it was because I was facilitating that training, but as a supervisor, but that was around, and I know the date on that one, because it can be quite specific, it was 28th of April, I think, around that sort of time. And there was a couple of challenges at that incident at Trellick Tower, and we did quite a robust session on it was like a tactical decision exercise on arrival tactics, because obviously there was a couple of challenges at Trellick Tower. So from my memory, that was the most current sort of theory-based input that I've been involved with in high-rise firefighting.
Okay, that's helpful, and we might be able to find some of those in a moment, just as we look at this spreadsheet for different things. But looking at 633, at the moment focusing on the one you got on the 23rd of March 2017, it says theoretical station-based training.
Yeah.
What was that? Can you remember?
I wouldn't be able to honestly stay here and this is exactly what I did, but from previous training sessions I've held on the theory side of it, so we would look through policy. It would be about, what I want en route sort of, advice would be, so if any further traffic comes through, I run arrival tactics and site of appliances, looking at what, if it's a dry riser or wet riser within that building, how we augment that, the equipment needed to firefight within high-rise buildings, the procedure we adopt within the building in terms of the safe system of work, referring out to the bridgehead. So generally, from my memory, that would be how that theory session would have been facilitated.
It sounds from that pretty comprehensive. Would that be fair?
I would say so, yes.
Right. And prior to that, you had another station-based, or theoretical station-based session on the 14th of September 2016. If you look at page 22 of the spreadsheet, which means coming forwards. If you look at just near the bottom of the page, 14th of September 2016, you'll see another reference to firefighting in high-rise buildings 633. Again, theoretical station-based training. Can you remember what that session was about?
Again, I wouldn't be able to recall specifics of it. It would be very similar to the tactics I've just discussed in terms of en route, on arrival, equipment, anything else. Yeah.
So were these sessions the same, or did they develop in response to new learning between September 16 and March 17?
Remember having any new learning within that package? No, it would be in a very similar package that was delivered between those two dates.
Right. And if you, there's one I should say, is one in May 2016 on page 21, and on page 20, 10th of February 2016. I won't go to these if the answer is the same, but these are all station-based theoretical training on policy 633.
That
again,
may be the one that we facilitated at Hammersmith. I'd have to look.
Well, let's go back to that. It's
okay.
Page 20, because you did mention, I think, February 16. Page 20 is February 16. And it's round about the middle of the page, 10th of February 2016. There are actually 3 entries there. In fact, there are 4 entries there for the same date.
I think that is. I'm pretty certain that's the one we facilitated at Hammersmith Fire Station. I may be wrong because it was around that sort of time.
Right. And those are referred to as firefighting in high-rise buildings 633 twice, and there is an entry for the 10th of February, theoretical station-based training, and again just below that, and then compartment firefighting 793, same date. But again, that's referred to as theoretical station-based training. So maybe that wasn't the one.
With reference to that, because the session we had at Hammersmith was essentially, it was an area-based training package. So we was on something called strategic resource, right, where we facilitated a period of time where we're not operational, but we still have, so that'll be a separate entry into our station diary, and then next to that we would still have our core skills training. So there's no facility for me to leave that core skills training blank, because it doesn't accept. So I can only say that was if that was the same date alongside the training event at Hammersmith Fire Station. So we would have to have populated that with some kind of high-rise training to tie that in and be able to sign it off on our station diary, training diary.
I see. So in simple terms, are you saying that the entry there, although it says theoretical station-based training, is actually linked to a practical?
I can't 100% confirm that, but that's what my understanding would be, yes.
Okay. You're going from your recollection, I imagine,
yes,
because I'm not being very helpful in showing you documents that help that. Yes. Okay. Now, before we leave this document, can I just ask you to look at page 18? Just something I wanted to ask you about while I was in the document, Mr. Dowden. On page 18, again, we have, in fact, we have 2 references that I wanted to ask you about for firefighting in high-rise buildings, policy 633. Do you see that just below halfway down, you see that on the 28th of October 2015, there's theoretical station-based training, firefighting in high-rise buildings 633, and it says lecturer, incident management, buildings and structures, firefighting in high-rise buildings 633. Could you explain that entry?
Again, I wouldn't be able to specifics, but it would be referenced into policy 633. So again, it would be a theory session in terms of our on arrival tactics and the equipment needed to firefight within a high-rise premise.
But it says that it refers to you, I think, as a lecturer. Is that right, or is it referring to somebody else as the lecturer?
Right. So the lecturer, yeah. So that would be. Obviously, because as a watch manager, and or if you're an officer of London Fire at watch base level, you will be deemed the person to facilitate those theories training sessions. So there'll be an entry for me delivering that the theory-based session, and then for the other members of the watch who are receiving that theory input.
So when it says lecturer, as it does quite a lot through this training record, are we to understand it that you are the person delivering the lecture on the subject to your firefighters?
Yes, that's generally how it's facilitated, yes.
And how big was your attendance? Was it just Red Watch, or was it...
No, that's just local to my watch only. So every watch-based officer, it won't be facilitated outside their own watch, outside their own team.
And on 633 specifically, were there any lecture materials, like handouts or slides, that you would deliver to your firefighters when giving that lecture?
Not that I can recall. It would more be that I would reference it into policy, have a print-out policy, and generally facilitate maybe some questioning, involvement of the team, and then facilitate maybe a whiteboard, have a diagram of a high-rise premise and how we would set up, referencing it back to policy 633.
And we see a little bit lower down the same page, for the 6th of November 2015, that again, firefighting in high-rise building 633, lecturer, incident management, buildings and structures, firefighting in high-rise building 633. So that's only about a week or so, 10 days or so later. Again, theoretical station-based training. Do you remember whether that was a different lecture that you delivered?
I can't, no.
Well, perhaps I should ask you, were you, when it refers to lecturer, that's you, is it?
Yeah, if that's the record, then that would be myself, yes.
And do you remember why you delivered this, what looks like, from this document, the same lecture, only 10 days apart?
No, I can't.
And was anybody supervising you as to what you would be lecturing on when lecturing on high-rise firefighting?
I wouldn't have any supervisor as such. There would be obviously the rest of the firefighters on the watch and my junior officers, so the crew managers, but no one really sort of supervising what the content was, or a quality assurance, of one of a better word, no.
No. So you didn't go to a superior officer and say, this is what I'm going to lecture my firefighters on 633 this afternoon?
No.
Did that ever happen?
Not in that respect. We do have a process by where our training will be audited by a senior officer, and that will be facilitated by a day of auditing, and they'll come down and they'll see a practical application, not specific to high-rise. They would, in terms of what we may have training on that day, and then also audit a theory-based session as well, and test some firefighters' knowledge of a certain piece of equipment. But again, that's something that will be facilitated by our actual area team.
So how did you, or could you ever know whether the lectures that you were giving to your firefighters about high-rise firefighting were effective?
I suppose the only way I could really do that is by when I see them out in the instant ground, how they apply themselves on the fire ground. I would never really sort of evaluate the success of that training session.
Leaving it to the fire ground in the case of an actual incident, might that not be a bit late?
It could be seen as, yeah, I suppose.
Okay. Can I then ask you then to look, put that bundle away? You don't have it there. Can I ask you to take up policy 633, which is in tab 4 of the policy bundle? I think I gave the reference 0000178. And this is the one current as of June 2015. Can I ask, please, first of all, to turn to page paragraph 7.45, which you'll find on page 14 of 28. I'm going to start with this topic, evacuation. Para 7.45, the IC just give me a moment. I think something may have gone. No, right, it's been renumbered. It's 7.49. We go to that. That's it. Next. Right. Mr. Trial Director, could you go back to the one you had just a moment ago? Mr. Dowden, I'm sorry about this. This is, that's it there. 7.49, evacuation. The IC should consider following the evacuation plan devised as part of the occupier's fire risk assessment, unless the fire situation dictates otherwise. Now, my question is, what training did you ever get in how to consider to follow the evacuation plan under that policy?
So unless, apart from actually that policy and the individual's discretion in terms of how to apply that, I don't recall receiving any training in particular to that statement.
So the answer is really the same as the answers you gave before when I was showing you the GRA 3.2.
Yes.
And in relation to the next paragraph, 7.50, where it says it may be necessary to undertake a partial or full evacuation in a residential building where a stay-put policy is normally in place. Again, my question is or was, well, what training did you get in respect of undertaking partial or full evacuation in such a building?
Again, nothing outside what would be in that policy 633. I've not received any practical training of how to apply that.
And you can take this, I think, quite quickly. If you just then go down to 7.51 A and B, the IEC should consider the effective firefighting tactics on evacuation and vice versa, and the resources required to support the evacuation or stay-put policy. What was your training in respect of how to consider those matters? Is your answer the same?
Yes.
Can I ask you then to look a little bit lower down at 7.55 over the page? Let's just look at this together. The advice offered during fire survival calls, and I'm sorry, I should have told you, this is underneath fire survival guidance, which is the heading. The advice offered during fire survival calls should be re-evaluated throughout an incident, and this may require a change in the advice given. In exceptional circumstances, an IC may consider informing control that their advice to FSG callers should be altered, e.g. to attempt to leave their property. I'm just going to pause there, just ask you to look at those words, and I ask you this question: did you ever receive any training in how to re-evaluate the advice offered during fire survival calls throughout an incident?
Not that I can recall, no.
Looking at the next sentence, in exceptional circumstances, an IC may consider informing control that their advice to FSG callers should be altered, e.g. to attempt to leave their property. Did you ever receive any training in how you would go about working through that question, how to consider informing control that the advice should change?
So any training, it would just be through that obviously paragraph and our own fire survival guidance policy and my own interpretation of how I would facilitate that at an incident as an incident commander.
So would this be fair that you knew that that was the policy, but you were left to your own discretion based on your experience as to how to decide what to do about advice to FSG
I was aware
callers?
that was the case. You can alter it. It does step outside our control, the operator's policy. And I know that has to be only the officer to watch whoever's in charge of the control room at that time, and that's only can be confirmed between that individual and the incident commander. I can't recall if I've actually received any training on how that is done.
And would the same apply to what to look for by way of exceptional circumstances? Were you trained in what were exceptional circumstances?
No.
Mr. Chairman, it may be a convenient moment for a break.
Okay. We had a good time?
This is a good
Yes?
time. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Dowden, we're going to have a break now. We'll have 20 minutes to give you time to have a break, a cup of coffee or whatever. Can I ask you this? Now you've started giving your evidence, I have to ask you not to discuss your evidence or the case or anything about this particular inquiry with anyone else until you finish giving your evidence. And that will apply if we go over lunchtime, as I think we shall. Can you just remember that?
Yes.
Thank you very much. 20 past 11, please. Mr. Dowden, before we continue, are you happy standing all the time?
At the moment, yes, I'm fine.
All right. Well, if you feel you'd like to sit down, because we can move that lectern so that you're not sitting down behind it.
No, that's very kind. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yes, Mr.
Mr. Dowden, can I just ask you, how often, as at June 2017, did you at North Kensington Fire Station practice drills?
High-rise drills.
Well, let's start with any drills.
Well, that would be incorporated into the core skills training. So I couldn't give you a sort of definitive number on that, no.
I mean, roughly a week, how many drills, ordinary drills of any kind, would you do?
Well, we don't work an ordinary week, so we do 2 days and 2 nights. Generally, the practical stuff we're facilitated on days, and then sort of maybe some theory, and then potentially on the night duties, theory sessions will be practiced.
And now high-rise drills. How often, as at June 2017, would you practice high-rise drills at North Kensington?
It's very difficult, particularly at North Kensington, to actually do a practical based high-rise drill. So for me, I would generally facilitate the high-rise training through more of a theory-based input in terms of referencing it to policy 633.
Why is it difficult at North Kensington to do a practical-based high-rise drill?
Well, I wouldn't just keep this to North Kensington Fire Station. We don't have the facility, as far as I'm aware, any London fire station to replicate a high-rise drill. We have a sort of training towers, but we generally use those to facilitate sort of ladder work training. But for me, it's quite difficult to facilitate a real robust high-rise training scenario at station-based level.
Where would you go, or where would you be sent, if you were to have a high-rise fire drill which was properly practical?
We can facilitate off-station training, whether they're a local authority may surrender a building that's not being used. We can potentially use that facility, and then that's deemed, you have to do a lot of background work behind that, risk assessments and everything else, because obviously it's not an LFB premise.
Right. And how often would you say, as at June 2017, would you facilitate an off-station training in a building surrendered by a local authority?
The only time I've ever been involved with that was not my time at North Kensington. I couldn't. The only time I've done that and facilitated that when I was at Surbiton and Greenwatch, I facilitated a high-rise practical scenario at Tower. And because at that point a lot of the floors were unoccupied. I can't be specific on what year that was, but I know that I did facilitate a high-rise sort of a search and rescue drill at Tower.
Right. And that's the only one in your
That's the only one I've organised as a watch officer, yes.
You've organised. How many have you actually been involved in your career?
From memory, it would only be that one and the practical application that we did at the full day at Hammersmith, and then as an incident commander, but not as a watch-based scenario. So when I went away to Morton and Marsh to Fire Service College, they had a range of different premises that you could, your instant command skills would be tested. So they had different buildings, and they have a high-rise facility at Morton and Marsh Fire Service College when it was under sort of the public body.
Yeah. And in terms of the practical application that you did at the full day at Hammersmith, how did that differ from, or did it differ from the high-rise exercise that you helped organise at the Tolworth Tower when you were at Surbiton?
They're very different because obviously it's very hard to replicate at a station-based level a thorough high-rise drill because you cannot replicate the scenario because you don't have the size of that building, the facilities, We just don't have that in London.
And what was it at Hammersmith that you had in terms of physical structures to enable you to practice high-rise procedures?
It was a purpose-built training tower, which maybe 8 floors in height. And the scenario was we'd use the ground floor of that training tower as what we call our bridgehead. And then from memory, we'd facilitate using maybe 2 floors above that, and the second floor would be the fire floor. And it was, going through in terms of getting the equipment needed at the bridgehead, getting water supplies, and then putting firefighter crews through those 2 floors into what we call the fire floor and into compartment. But you can't replicate a compartment fire. There's no carbonation environment. It's all in safe air.
And did that programme at Hammersmith, the practical training-based day at Hammersmith, cover compartmentation breach and fire spread beyond the compartment of origin?
Not in the practical session from my memory, in this what we call the training yard, but we did do a further tactical decision exercise. I can't remember if that incorporated sort of fire spread, but certainly we did do some work on fire survival guidance, and I was put under a bit of pressure in terms of that.
Right. Did you have any practical training on the Hammersmith day in terms of fire survival guidance calls and communications?
Try to explain it. So I was in one room as the incident commander, and I was getting fed information about, you have to visualise it really in terms of what we're trying to achieve. And I remember having a radio, had some traffic coming into me. I can't be specific of the traffic coming into me. And at first it was a high-rise incident, a high-rise compartment fire. So how we respond to that, how we resource it, what my decision-making was. And then as the incident escalates, I remember sort of dropping in. I can't 100% guarantee if there was fire spread involved in that scenario, but certainly I do quite specifically remember, because at the debrief we were talking about the fire survival guidance stuff. That was later brought in. We got persons reported, and we now have to manage the fire survival guidance process.
Right. How many fire survival guidance calls were you juggling during that practical training exercise?
I couldn't put a number on it, but it wasn't to the scale of what we had at Grenfell Tower.
Did you ever practice the evacuation of people with mobility issues, or elderly people or children, from high floors in high-rise blocks?
I've never practiced that,
no. Now, if you go to your witness statement, please, and look at page 2, Mr. Dowden. You say that at the beginning of 2016, the end of 2016, the beginning of 2017, you did a back to basics training day based on the Lakenhall House fire in 2009. Did you attend the Lakenhall House fire?
No.
Can you tell us what that training that you refer to involved?
So there was 2, I think I've got a bit confused in terms of that statement. There was 2 separate things I was trying to explain, so I'll explain those now. That back to basics training was the one I'm referring to at Hammersmith in terms of the tactical decision exercise. And from my understanding, it was the aim of that tactical decision exercise in particular was to try and maybe replicate some of the learning points that came out of Lakenhall House in terms of the fire survival guidance. Because at Lakenhall House we had no way of managing or processing that information of multiple fire survival guidance, which basically people are trapped within their premise from the components of fire, heat or smoke. There was a separate training package put together on Lakenhall House, which was again a theory-based sort of PowerPoint presentation, but that wasn't delivered at that point at Hammersmith when we did the back to basics training.
Right. What were the learning points? Can you remember that were replicated in that training?
For me, the main one I think was about how he managed the fire survival guidance calls.
Right. What was the... So that was the subject, but let me press you a little. What was the learning point? What was the takeaway from Lacknell House that got replicated in the Back to Basics training?
I wouldn't be able to give you specifics in terms of the learning outcomes. Just from my own interpretation, it was based on that scenario, having known the incident at Lacknell House. It seemed to me to be very similar in terms of what they were trying to replicate on particularly in that tactical decision exercise session.
What did you learn from the Back to Basics training that you didn't know before?
I suppose for me it was how under pressure you can feel, and I'd never had any dealings operationally with dealing with fire survival guidance calls and the process of that information. I suppose for me personally how that can make you feel under pressure and how important it is to prioritise your resources when you get a fire survival guidance call.
Do you know what prompted the LFB to deliver a Lacknell House-related course at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017?
I could only presume it would be from the recommendations from maybe the inquest following Lacknell House.
Right. But you don't know from your own knowledge?
No, not from my own knowledge, no.
Was this the first time, end of 16, early 17, that this kind of training was delivered to you?
Yes.
Can I ask you to go back to your witness statement and look at page 7, at the bottom of the page, last paragraph. You refer there to a fire at Shepherd's Court, and you say, at a fire within Shepherd's Court, about 6 to 7 months before the Trellick Tower incident, the fire did start to spread up the building, but that was caused by burning bits of cladding around the UPVC windows, igniting cladding on the floors above the fire floor. This is a common event in high-rise fires, and it is known as the Coanda effect. I'll come back to those words in that paragraph in a moment, but I just want to take it in stages. You mentioned Shepherd's Court. That was a fire on the 19th of August 2016. It's a matter of record.
Okay.
Do you remember that?
I do remember that incident, yes.
And what kind of building was it in?
It was a high-rise.
It was a high-rise. Do you remember where exactly it was?
It's located in Shepherd's Bush.
In Shepherd's Bush.
Shepherd's Bush Common.
Did you attend that fire?
I did, yes.
You did. At what point in the fire did you attend?
I believe I went on Make Pumps 8.
You went on Make Pumps 8?
Not the initial attendance, no.
Right. And do you remember how soon after the initial attendance pumps were made 8 at that incident?
No, I don't.
Now you say that in your statement that cladding around UPVC windows ignited cladding on the floors above the fire, and that's a common event. But you also say, in the next sentence, the fire can spread up the building externally, but it usually spreads upwards for just 1 or 2 floors. And this we can manage because firefighters can go 1 or 2 floors above where the fire is and firefight it from the inside. My question is, when you say it usually goes up 1 or 2 floors, why do you say that? Just from
experiences I've heard about in the Fire Brigade further case studies, generally, compartments do fail in the external. That's not something that's unusual to any fire. And sometimes a compartment failing in terms of a window or a door or an opening failing actually sometimes it isn't a bad thing because it can improve conditions for firefighters within that compartment, i.e. to get rid of unburnt gases, which can be an issue, or improve visibility. So that's not something that is alien to an officer or a firefighter. We resource that accordingly, and as I said in my statement, it's not a quick process. Generally, the window would fail. If we can get access, we can get covering jet on that to try and stop that external fire spread, and that's not something that's uncommon. It doesn't generally go at such a rate where you can't resource it to sort of stop that external fire spread. And as I said in my statement, we generally can, from experience I've heard from other firefighters, other officers, that we can go into those floors above, and generally it might not be, it's just the outside of that compartment that's been compromised, because plastic does burn quite, it can, has quite a low melting point, and it generally might just be the window around, or internal furnishings around that, whether it's windows, curtains, and it gives us enough time to get into those compartments above the fire floor and fight that internally. If it's close enough to the ground, then a covering jet to suffice, and we can knock and suppress that fire spread.
Yes. You said a minute ago that plastic does burn and can at a low melting point, and generally might be that the window around in internal furnishings can burn. Can I just follow that up a little bit?
Yep.
As at June 2017, could you describe your state of knowledge and experience as to the melting and burning of plastic components around a window?
Yeah, I wouldn't have any scientific knowledge in terms of the specific, at what temperature that would fail. But from being in the fire service, you do understand that certain materials have a lower tolerance when they're involved in fire. And that's why certain buildings should, particularly high-rise, should be built in a way that the materials used are more tolerant when they're involved in fire.
So would you say that in your experience, as it was in June 2017, the presence of plastic or plastic-type materials around windows was a known risk to you as an incident commander? Yeah,
there was a known risk.
And would that be the kind of risk that when you did a familiarisation visit, or a visit under what we call Section 7.2D, I'll ask you about those later, but when you did those kinds of visits, is that known risk something that you would want to look out for in a building you were visiting?
If I'm going to be honest, it's not something that I would go into a building, looking for that. Maybe that's the expectation. For me, when I do the familiarisation visit, it's more about the facilities, the layout, etc., within that property, within the high-rise block.
Okay, we'll come back to that. I just wanted to pursue that there. In your experience as it was in June 2017, were there any occasions that you'd come across when a fire had gone up further than 1 or 2 floors on the exterior of a tower block?
The only other point of reference to that would be a fire I attended when I was at Chiswick. Very late on the incident, that was at Cambridge Gardens in Kingston. That was a high-rise block. I was a crew manager at the time. From memory, that only involved about 3 compartments, fully involved 3 compartments. Again, that was, I believe that was very near to the sort of the top of the building. That was my only other real experience of either as a firefighter or an officer being involved in a high-rise fire where it's involved more than one compartment.
Okay. And can you give us an idea of when that was, the date?
It must have been between, and it is a bit of a time scale, I do apologise, 2008, 2009.
Right. Where were you based?
I was based at Chiswick.
You were based at Chiswick?
Yeah.
And do you remember what the materials on the exterior were that were alight?
No.
Do you remember what kind of building it was? I mean, it was a high-rise.
It was a high-rise block.
And
yes,
how high was it?
Again, it should only be an estimate, guesstimate, 20 floors maybe.
20 floors.
Maybe less.
Do you remember how fast the fire spread on the exterior?
No, when I was mobilised to that incident, we would make pump 20, and generally when an incident of that size goes to make pump, that can be a fair way into the incident. And I don't recall at what time. No.
Now, I'd like you to look, please, at a slideshow, which is a document produced by the LFB entitled The Tall Building Facades. And it's bundle tab 10, and Mr. Trial Director, it's LFB 403521. Now, you'll see that on the front page there, on page 1, it's dated the 13th of July 2016, and it's an LFB official document. We have been told by the LFB that, in fact, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong about this later, and I'll come back to you if I have to, but it was in fact completed in October 2016. But it looks like the heading date didn't change. So bear with me on the basis that this is an October 16 document. And the reasons why I say that will become obvious in a moment, I hope. First question, have you ever seen this document before?
I don't recall seeing that document, no.
Now, I'm going to show it to you quickly, and I'm just going to ask you whether you've ever had training on parts of this document. But if you've never seen it before, can I assume you've never actually had training on the document as a whole?
I don't recall seeing that document, no.
Right. Can I then ask you, please, to turn to, first of all, pages 2, 3 and 4. Just have a look at those. So page 2, here are 3 photographs, an exterior fire at Grozny, and at the address Dubai and the Tamwheel Tower, Dubai. Are you familiar with those events?
No.
You're not?
No.
Can I ask you to go to the next page, please? Same topic, exterior fire on a tower block in Shanghai and in Baku in Azerbaijan in 2015. Were you familiar with those events?
No, no.
Can you look at the next page, please? Basingstoke and Garnock Court, exterior fires, and in Garnock Court's case, 1999. Were you familiar, or are you familiar with that?
I'm not with the Basingstoke. I'm only familiar now with Garnock Court because it's been brought to our attention, but previous to that, to 14th of June 2017, I had no knowledge of that.
When was Garnock Court brought to your attention?
I had a meeting with some representatives from the Fire Brigade Union, and they brought to my attention that this fire had occurred in 1999.
You had a meeting with
Yeah.
representatives of the Fire Brigades Union. When was that meeting?
It wasn't just for me. It was we were invited as a watch to go and sort of have a conversation with them in terms of if we had any issues around sort of the process we'd be involved with, any concerns, and that was mentioned to me at that meeting.
When was that meeting? Do you remember?
It was this year.
This year?
Yeah.
Do you remember when this year?
It was early part of this year, I think. But but I can't give a specific date, no.
Where was that meeting?
That was at a hotel in London.
Hotel?
In London.
Hotel in London?
Yeah, down by Hyde Park.
Okay. And do you remember who from the Fire Brigades Union was there?
Matt Rack was there, and Steve White as well was there. And
you say it was your watch.
Yeah.
Was that meeting just with Red Watch North Ken or any other watches?
No, I think it was a fairly useful meeting because none of us had been. We knew the inquiry process was coming up, so none of us had sort of been in that environment. I believe it was going to be off. It wasn't just for the Red Watch at North Kensington. There was potential for other watches or people who were involved that night to have a meeting with the Fire Brigades Union.
Were you given any materials, handouts, sheets at that meeting?
No.
Were you shown a slideshow or any visuals at that meeting?
It was a very informal meeting. There was no handouts given. It was more about if we had any questions or concerns about the process, because obviously the Fire Brigades Union have been involved in a very similar process to this in the past.
And do you remember who at that meeting mentioned Garnet Court?
I believe it was Matt Rack.
And do you remember the context in which he mentioned Garnet Court to you?
I think it was just in relation to similar incidents we've had relating to the incident at Grenfell Tower in this country previously.
Did he say anything about what you should understand by what happened at Garnet Court?
No.
What about other high-rise fires?
No.
What was your takeaway from the meeting you had with the Fire Brigades Union?
It was more of the case of being an FBU member, that the FBU will be fully supportive of us behind this process in terms of our welfare, moving forward from that meeting.
Did you talk about any other aspect of the evidence you were going to give?
No.
Sorry, any aspect of the evidence you were going to give
No,
at that
not
meeting? But before June 2017, you'd not heard of Garnet Court?
No.
Right. Can I go back to the slideshow, please? Can you please turn to page 5, or be shown page 5? And can that be expanded? Thank you. This is a page which is taken from a regulatory document I won't trouble you with identifying. And it's entitled External Fire Spread. What are the issues? You can see on the right, fires allowed to develop may flash over and break out through windows. Flames spread up over or through the cladding. Flames can extend over 2 metres above window opening regardless of cladding. And if fire re-enters the building, secondary fires may then develop. And then in bold at the bottom, it is important that the facade does not contribute significantly to the fire spread. Now, just looking at those topics, were they something that you were aware of, as at June 2017, as risks in high-rise buildings?
I'd say some of them, but not all of them, no.
Well, let's take it in stages.
Yep.
Fires are allowed to develop, may flash over and break out through windows. As at June 17, were you aware that that was a risk?
I'm aware of flashover as a risk, yes.
Next one, flames spread up or over or through the cladding. As at June 2017, were you aware that that was a risk with high-rise buildings?
No.
You weren't. Next one, flames can extend over 2 metres above window opening regardless of cladding. Were you aware that that was a risk with high-rise buildings as at 2007?
I would say yes, but not just specific to high-rise buildings. As I spoke about earlier, compartmentation, windows can fail. That's not something that's unexpected.
No, but it's a risk that applies to high-rise buildings as any other.
Yes, that's correct.
And then the last bullet point, if fire re-enters the building, secondary fires may then develop. As at June 2017, Mr. Dowden, were you aware that that was a risk in relation to high-rise buildings?
I wouldn't be able to say no, I was aware of that risk, no.
Right. And looking
Were
at the
you
big...
aware of that as a risk with any sort of buildings? Because to the layman, it would seem that if you get a fire breaking out in a floor above, there's always the risk that it will get out and go up another one.
So, to clarify, if the fire enters buildings, secondary fires, and they may do it, yes, because that's not a phenomenon that's separate to high-rise firefighting. That, as I said before, try and reference back to compartment firefighting. Generally windows and doors openings can fail. So, I suppose with that in mind, yes, I can, because I was aware of the Coanda effect and how that can, the further up you go up a high-rise, then obviously that can be an issue. So I would have to say yes, I was aware of that, yes.
But that risk is, well, would you say that risk there, the risk of re-entry and then secondary fires developing, is particularly acute in the case of high-rise buildings?
Yes, because obviously the height issue of the building.
Yes. And then looking at the letters in bold at the bottom, it is important that the facade does not contribute significantly to the fire spread. As at June 2017, were you aware of that principle?
No, I can't say I was, because I wasn't aware that combustible facades were put on the external buildings.
Right. And let's just look on in the document to page 15. Case study. Excuse me. Case study 20 pump fire Shepherd's Bush. And there is a picture of a high-rise building. Are you familiar with it?
That's Shepherd's Court.
That's Shepherd's Court. And I'm just going to turn the pages with you very quickly, if I can. You'll see the case study and the facts are set out. Fire started on 7th floor in 2-bedroom flat with rapid spread of the fire along the facade. Fire spread from the 7th floor to the 10th floor with additional damage at the 11th floor. 20 pump, 1 APL, 5 jets and BA. Fire likely to have started from the tumble dryer, which was due to be repaired. And then just turning the pages on, I mean, first of all, do you remember that as an accurate summary of your own experience at Shepherd's Court?
Of my own experience, yes.
And turning the pages on, we can just look and see what they show. There was preliminary testing, which I think you can ignore but just know about. And then if you turn the pages on through to page 25, you can see what's between 15 and 25. It's an analysis of what caused the fire in the facade. General conclusion, let's look at this together. As a general principle, the external envelope of the building should not contribute, in bold, to the fire spread along the facade. As at June 2017, Mr. Dowden, were you aware of that principle?
No.
No. New construction material and method of construction are being used in facades and with a limited understanding of their fire behaviour / performance. Were you aware that that was the case?
No.
Next one. There is a bold need to bold understand what products are being used in the facade system and their fire behaviour, and if they are used appropriately and meet the relevant guidance. As at June 2017, Mr. Dowden, were you aware of the need to understand those matters?
No.
No. Last sentence, these could affect the way fires develop and spread in a building. As at June 2017, were you aware of that?
No. No, I wasn't.
Thank you. I think you could put that document away. Let me just ask you some general questions. Did you get any training or education about the lessons learnt from the Shepherd's Court fire?
No.
Generally, though, is it common that fires exit one compartment and spread to the one above?
can't say it's a common event. It does happen.
It does happen.
You know, I'll reference back to the Trellick Tower incident we had. The main, I spoke about earlier, we had some challenges that night, and the main one was that because of the height of the building at Trellick Tower, it has to have a wet riser. So that's basically a pipe, want of a better word, that runs the whole way of that building, and it's fully charged with water. We had a fire on the 27th floor, and unfortunately there was a real issue with the water supply within that wet riser, and we couldn't make a compartment entry for approximately half an hour. And because of the construction of that building, that contained within the compartment, there was no external fire spread. It obviously developed on the outside of the building, but it didn't spread on the external. And that was a delay, a real delay, because of the water supply issues we had getting into that compartment.
Let me ask you then a couple of more questions about Trellick Tower and follow that up. Did you understand any differences between the two fires, Trellick Tower, which you attended, and Shepherd's Court, which you attended, so far as compartmentation was concerned?
No, I would have no knowledge of that. The expectation it would be the same.
Did Trellick Tower involve a problem with compartmentation?
Sorry, can you say the question again?
Did the Trellick Tower fire involve a breach of compartmentation?
Yeah, the fire, from my understanding, it breached the compartmentation in such that the windows, again, had failed, which again is not an uncommon event, but it was contained and confined to that one compartment because there was no external fire spread on that property.
No, right. And you said a minute ago that, and I may not have got your exact words, you had a fire on the 27th floor, and there was a problem with the wet riser. I think you said that you had to have a wet riser because of the height of the building. As at June 2017, were you aware of at what height, or over what height, a high-rise building has to have a wet riser?
Yes.
And what is that?
50 metres, as of 2006. Previous that was 60 metres.
Right. We'll come back to revisit that in a moment when we look at Grenfell Tower in particular. Before we do, as an incident commander, would you have been aware, as of June 2017, that fire spread up the exterior of buildings with cladding was a real possibility?
No, I didn't.
Is it part of your training as an incident commander, IC, to be alert to the risk of, or aware of the risk of failure of compartmentation because of the possibility of fire on the exterior?
Yes, that's something I would have to take into account as an incident commander.
As of June 2017, were you aware that the LFB had written to a number of London councils saying that external fire spread on high-rise residential buildings as a result of being clad in combustible panels presented a generic health and safety issue? Did you know that?
I remember seeing some, not internally in the LFB, but I believe in a local press, in a newspaper, about a letter that had been sent to Hammersmith and Fulham Council, I believe, but I can't remember what date that was. And I think that was referencing it back to the Shepherd's Court fire, but not something that was sent out internally within the London Fire Brigade, no.
Right. So could we say that your knowledge was as good as the person in the street about that letter?
Yes, I would say so.
As of June 2017, do you think you would be able to identify a cladding fire if you saw one?
No, I wouldn't be able to identify a cladding fire because I didn't know at that point that that was being used as a building material.
We're now going to turn to a different topic, but one which we've been talking a little bit about this morning, which is prior visits to Grenfell Tower. And I want to talk about your own personal experience of the building prior to the night of the 14th of June 2017. You say on page 2 of your statement that you were familiar with Grenfell Tower, although you'd never visited it for operational reasons. That's the first sentence of the third paragraph on that page. Now, just to be clear, does that mean that you had visited the tower but had never attended a fire there?
That's correct.
And you say that, a little lower down, that North Kensington watches were asked to visit while Ryden was doing the refurbishment.
That's correct.
And was that, do you remember, was that done on a watch-by-watch basis? Did all the watches go?
That's correct, yeah. There was a particular thing with it because, as I mentioned in my statement, they were adding residential floors into the accommodation, and because of that they had to extend the dry riser within that block, which is basically a hollow pipe that runs the internal of that building, which allows the fire service to basically augment or allow water supply into that building. And currently that only started, I can't be 100% sure, I think it was either the 4th or the 5th floor, because that's where at that point in time the current residential accommodation started from. So all watchers were asked to familiarise themselves with that, because we had to change our tactical plan for the duration of the point of when they were extending that dry riser down for the rest of the residential accommodation. And that the amendment to the TAC plan was that we would have had to have, from my memory, not use a dry riser in its when it would finish in its location where it was outside the building on the left-hand side. We'd have had to haul a length of hose up onto Grenfell Walk, supplement and almost replicate that being a dry riser into the 4th or the 5th floor where the current first dry riser outlet was. But that was only for a very, very short space of time, I think two or 3 days, until that dry riser had been extended down to ground floor level. And then once that had been completed, we would go back to sort of the default on arrival tactics that we would actually plug in to the dry riser inlet, which was at the bottom of Grenfell Tower, to the left of the main entrance.
Do you remember, off the top of your head, when that visit was that you looked at the dry riser and its move?
I don't think it was in the same year as Grenfell Tower. I believe it was in, I think, as I said in my statement, I believe it was in the summer of 2016, but I can't confirm that.
Well, we're going to look at some detailed visit dates in a moment. But before I do, can I just ask you, at any time, were you ever aware of the exact height of Grenfell Tower?
I wouldn't say the exact height. No, the only time that would be I can't honestly say that I was aware at any moment in time that I was 100% certain of the height of Grenfell Tower.
Were you ever aware of roughly what the height of
Yes,
Grenfell
roughly,
Tower?
yeah.
And what was that?
Well, you're looking at, from memory, about 20 floors. So we say it's 3 metres per floor. So looking at roughly about 60 metres.
Did it ever occur to you that, being 60 metres, it exceeded the height for which, or at which, dry risers were appropriate?
I don't recall where, at any moment in time, having a conscious thought that was the case, no.
So you never said or thought, hang on a second, this building exceeds 50 metres, what's it doing with a dry riser?
No, I didn't.
Who was the station manager at North Kensington at the time of your visits? I appreciate it may have changed over time.
Yeah, there was we did have quite a turnover of station managers through that period. Now, I can't remember if it was station manager Nick Davis or station manager Andy Walton.
Nick Davis, I'm just going to write some names down.
Yep. Davis, spelled D-A-V-I-S.
Yes, and Andy Walton.
Yes.
And roughly, and I don't intend to hold you to the dates, but you arrived in North Ken in February 15.
Yep.
Can you give me an idea of who, after your arrival there, was the station manager up until June 2017?
There was my first station manager was he's retired now. Was station manager Daniel Hallisey. Daniel Hallisey.
Hallisey. Could you? I'm so sorry.
H-A-L-L-I-S-E-Y.
Right.
And then it went on to Nick Davis.
Right.
Then Andy Walton.
Yes.
And then after Andy Walton, we had station manager Wayne Johnson.
Wayne Johnson.
Yeah.
And who was the station manager at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire? Do you remember?
It was station manager Wayne Johnson.
It was Wayne Johnson by then. Okay. And how long had he been station manager before, after taking over from Andy Walton?
It was only a matter of 3 or 4 months, maybe.
Right. Okay, thanks. When you did your visits to Grenfell Tower, did you discuss them with the station manager, whoever it happened to be?
I can't remember if there was a specific conversation, but there would have been some kind of confirmation that we had visited the site, because obviously there was a request from the station manager to go and visit the site. I can't recall if that was done verbally or whether that was confirmed by email.
Okay. Can I just go back one? Mm-hmm. Just occurred to me, the list of names you've given me. That's 4 station managers between February 2015 and June 2017. So a period of 2.5 years. In your experience in the London Fire Brigade, what can you tell me about the rate of turnover of station managers at North Kensington in that period?
I don't, up until my point, I can only talk about my experience at North Kensington, so that is quite a high turnover of officers in that period. But that's not something that doesn't happen in London Fire Brigade. Senior officers, whether they get promoted, whether they certain skill set, they move on to different areas, that does happen. They don't tend to stay within a specific role, station, borough for a real long period of time.
Okay. Now, you say in your statement that you think that your watch, Red Watch, that is, visited in the summer of 2016. Did you go on that visit?
Yes, I did.
You did. Do you recall that independently from your own memory, or have you seen a document that reminded you of it?
No, I recall that from my memory.
Okay. Now, can I just ask you to look at tab 11, the bundle of documents, and a list of visits that we've been provided with. This is LFB 00003111, and it's a 2-page document. We've got it up there on the screen. Can I ask you please to look at the Red Watch visit for the 2nd of February 2016? 2nd of February 2016. It's about just below halfway down the page. And you'll see there that there are 2 entries with the same date and different times, 12 o'clock and 11 o'clock in the morning, North Kensington, and that's Red Watch, and the one at 12 o'clock is outside duty. And you see, reading across the page, high-rise premises 72D.
Yep.
And then underneath that, at 11 o'clock, which presumably preceded it, HFSV group risk visit done.
Yep.
G271272 Grenfell Tower. First of all, let's just go through this document, starting with the one you did at 11 o'clock, which is HFSV group risk visit. What is an HFSV group risk visit?
So that's a community fire safety based event where we would go to, it's not specific to a high-rise block, we would go to an area that has been identified as being a high risk in terms of potential for fire, and or vulnerable people have been identified, and we would go to that building, that premise, and what we would do is we would print off some paperwork to take with us, and that would allow us to speak to the residents within that block and give them some advice, fire safety advice, what to do in the event of a fire, and look at some basic fire safety within the home, some bad practices, general sort of, overloading of sockets, bedtime routines, specifically to high-rise blocks, what to do in the event of a fire in terms of, referencing that, what we spoke to earlier, referencing it back to the statement policy that generally within a high-rise block, if your flat is affected, you have a fire in your flat and it's safe to do so, then leave your property and make your way safely through the communal areas.
What does
Home fire
safety visit?
Home fire safety visit, yeah. And that's not something that's just a group risk visit allows us to go out and identify a larger premise, generally for high-rise blocks, where we can, what about words, reach our target audience in the most productive way. We do single dwelling home fire safety visits as well, but the GRVs are where we've identified that particularly people, any vulnerability to fire high-rise blocks, and that will be facilitated for a group risk visit.
So, because you said in your answer that you go to an area that has been identified as being a high risk in terms of potential of fire, can I just explore that a little bit? The high risk in terms of potential of fire, is that the occupant-driven risk, or is it the building?
That's occupant-driven. So we look at, there's certain identity, we call it P1 people, P1 persons, and P1 postcodes. Now, that means priority one. So the reference to the P1 postcode, that is anywhere that has had a previous fire, a building fire, and that postcode will flag up as being P1. So because of that's happened, we generally will sort of look at that area for trends if there's other fires, and we'll concentrate our home fire safety bits in that area. P1 people are generally people who have been identified through other agency, whether it's alcohol or drug misuse, vulnerable residents, whether it's social housing, whether there's a lone parent with children dependents, and that we have certain postcodes again where we will be able to identify that by. I can't remember the process behind how that is identified, but yeah, it's looking at certainly postcodes where we've had previous fires, and also trying to sort of identify the most vulnerable people within the community that would be potentially more susceptible to fire risk.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember what it was about Grenfell Tower in particular that made it more vulnerable to that kind of risk?
I don't know if it was Grenfell Tower itself. It was more that so it was a social housing block, and it was specific that we would maybe target these high-rise blocks that were of a social housing. So there's nothing that, from my understanding, that would stick out that the risk from the building was more in the actual the P1 people, the vulnerable people that potentially would be inside that block.
And what kind of detailed information did you have about the makeup of the population within the block to enable you to come to a decision that it was high, or view that it was high risk, so as to deserve an HFSV visit?
The only thing I can reference that back to, and I can't remember if that is the case that actually happened with that visit, but it would be the. I remember having a spreadsheet at station that had postcodes that were identified as risk areas. So whether that would be from where it had previous fires, or from sort of information gathering that had been done, that the concentration of people within that community, that area, that block, were at risk. And going back to the spreadsheet, if I can then, you then do at noon on the 2nd of February 16, outside duty, high-rise premises 72D. What was that? So an outside duty is a system that we have in place in London Fire Brigade. It's not just specific to high-rise premise. So if there's a building or premise on our station's ground that has compose a particular risk to firefighters, then we can go out by a process called a 72D familiarisation visit, and we can gather certain information from that block, that premise, that building. Allows us to input that onto an LFB system in terms of what risks or processes are in that premise that could cause risk to firefighters if we get a incident at that premise.
Now, you refer to it in your answer just now as a 72D familiarisation visit, but I think some people refer to them as different things. Can I just understand what you understand by a 72D visit? Is it the same as or different from a familiarisation visit?
They're the same.
They're the same. And a 72D visit is it formal?
Yeah, it's a fairly formal process, yes.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll come back to that in a minute. Just in terms of this 72D visit, you went on that. Is there anything that you remember particularly, standing here now, about what you saw or learnt on that visit?
I think if it was the same one where we went to that referenced it back to where they were extending the dry riser, I think that's the only thing I can really remember in terms of.
Okay. You say in your statement, in fact, that you were asked to familiarise yourself with the dry risers and amendments to approaches to the tower.
Yeah.
Who asked you to familiarise yourself with those things?
From memory, it was the station manager at the time at North Kensington.
So that would be Mr. Hallisey, would it? Sorry, Nick Davis.
I can't remember if it would be one of the two, either Nick Davis or Andy Walton, station manager Andy Walton.
Right. Either Nick Davis or Andy Walton. All right. Was there a document that you were given setting out your instructions as to what you should look at on that visit?
I can't remember.
Do you remember on that visit whether the building was being refurbished?
From my memory, yes, it was.
Were you asked to look at anything else other than the dry risers and the amendments to the approaches?
From memory on that visit, we I do remember sort of liaising with if it's a site manager or a contractor from Rydon's. And I do remember him speaking to us about they had a panel in the ground floor lobby area, which was a smoke extract panel system. And from my understanding, how it worked was that you'd have a detector head in all the communal lobby areas in the flats. And how it works is if that detector head, there's a fire in a compartment, smoke comes out into that lobby area, that detector head will actuate, send a signal down to that alarm panel. It will obviously show data that there has been actuation on that floor, and the what we call automatic opening vent on that floor should clear any smoke or carbonaceous environment into a protected shaft, and then take the products of combustion out of a vent on the top of the Grenfell Tower.
Do you remember the name of the site manager or contractor from Ryden that you spoke to?
No, I don't.
So you told us about the AOV. Did you learn anything else from Ryden on that visit about the refurbishment which was relevant to your assessment of fire safety?
I can't remember. The only other thing I remember doing is there was a boxing gym, I believe, and he showed us the boxing gym. We had a look in the boxing gym. That's obviously nothing to do in terms of the fire safety measures. I think the main thing was the smoke extract system that was obviously located in the panel, how it was operated, how it should operate.
Did you learn anything about the building construction and the materials being used?
Not that I can recall, no.
Did you look at the exterior?
I would have looked at the exterior.
Did you look at it critically, though, from a fire safety point of view?
No.
Did you notice the rain screen cladding?
I didn't notice the rain screen cladding because I wasn't aware at that time that there was such thing as rain screen cladding.
No, perhaps it's a slightly unfair question. At the time of your visit, in what condition was the exterior? Was it under construction or had it been completed?
I don't think it had been. I think it was still under construction.
Did you ask any questions about what was going up on the exterior of the building?
No.
Did anybody show you round the building?
Yeah, I think the contractor we met on site did show us around the building, yes.
Did you go up the tower? Did you go up the building?
I can't recall if we went up the building.
Did you note, would you remember noting anything about the layout of the lobbies and the stair?
The only time I remember, I think, going into the building, I was up at the Grenfell walk that used to came into Grenfell Tower, and I remember I was in the staircase, and I think when they were doing the extension to putting the increase in residential accommodation, I remember being around that sort of area, and it was like there was boarding to maybe where they were extending the residential accommodation, but I can't remember how far up I went into the tower, if at all. I really can't recall that.
Did you note the fact that it had a single protected escape route?
If I'm honest, at that point in time, I don't think I did, no.
Did you notice anything about whether there were or weren't any sprinklers?
No.
Did you notice anything about the layout of the lobbies outside the flats?
I do remember, I can't remember if it was from that visit or from the night, but I do remember that in the lobbies there were the dry riser outlets. So, from memory, as you came up, you was standing in the lobby, to your left hand side there was the dry riser outlet.
Do you remember having any views at the time of your visit about whether the dry riser outlet on each floor in the lobby was in an appropriate place or not?
Not at that moment in time, no.
Did anybody show you the lifts?
can't recall if we were shown the lifts.
Did anybody say anything about whether the lifts were fire lifts or firefighting lifts?
I can't remember.
We're going to dig a little bit more into the detail, and what I'm going to show you is a number of policies. We're going to look at GRA 3.2 and 633, but the reason I'm doing it, Mr. Dowden, is so you know. So it's really by way of a shopping list, and so you know why I'm asking you. Can I ask you then to go to GRA 3.2, which is Policy Bundle tab 7. And turn, please, internally to page 16. And on page 16, internally page, which I think is page 18 in the relativity reference. So internal page 16. And this is a list of bullet points which is contained in a passage which starts 2 pages before, which you don't need to look at, called Key Control Measures Planning. And some way into that section, and I should just so you're clear and I'm clear, this is the national guidance. Information to be gathered in relation to high-rise incidents should include, you can just see the shopping list and the wording at the top. Now, you've told us this morning that you're not familiar with the policy, and I understand that, but I just want to go down the shopping list to see whether, when you did your 72D visit in February 16, whether these items on the shopping list were checked or not. First of all, access for the siting of appliances, firefighters and equipment. Did you look at that?
I'd say yes, because we knew where to site the appliances, because obviously there was only one route into Grenfell Tower, and that's Grenfell Road, and we needed to know how to site the appliances in terms of how to supply the dry rising main.
The next one, availability of information for firefighters. Did you look at that?
It's quite a broad statement. I mean,
yes, it is. Let me see if I can make it a bit more specific. For example, when you did your visit, did you work out where you'd find plans to the building?
if I'm honest, I can't recall. I don't think we did. No.
Do you remember looking for a premises information box?
Not on that visit, but I know that's something that generally would be installed in a high-rise premise.
Right. Do you remember looking on your visit, actually going out and looking for it?
No.
You don't?
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt. I wonder if a short break might be a good idea. It's just I've been looking at the demeanour of the witness over the last 2 or 3 minutes, and he seems to have, his eyes have reddened, and he looks a little bit less assured than he did.
Well, how are you feeling, Mr. Dowden?
Yeah, break would be nice, if that's okay, please.
Okay. And, well then, thank you, Mr. Stewart. Would 5 minutes be enough for the moment?
Yeah.
And do think what I've said about sitting down, if you'd find it more comfortable.
Okay.
Might find it a bit more relaxing. All right, I'll rise for 5 minutes then. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Dowden, you happy to carry on?
Yeah.
We'll be stopping for lunch before very long. Give you a longer
Okay.
break. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Dowden, are you happy to carry on for another 20 or so minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. If not, if you want another break, just let me know. Back to the shopping list, if we could please. Height of building. When you went on this visit. Oh, sorry. Forgive me. We'll come back to that in a moment. I did need to ask you about this visit in 2016. Who else from Red Watch visited Grenfell Tower with you on that trip?
Without having the information in front, I couldn't actually reel off the actual sort of list of other attendees in terms of the firefighters and then any other junior officers that were there. That would be difficult to...
No. To be fair to you, Mr. Batterby, Charlie Batterby, says he went on it. Would that...
That would confirm, yeah.
That would confirm.
Be right, yes.
Right. Do you remember, were you the most senior person from North Ken Red Watch on that visit?
I would have been, yes.
Yes. Can I then go back to the shopping list and ask you what I was going to ask you, which was about the height of the building? On that visit, were you asked, or did you look at it? Did you make an assessment of the height of the building?
I don't remember making a conscious decision in terms of actual recording the height of the building, just, noting, understanding it was a high-rise block.
And you've answered my question about lifts. Can I just ask you about evacuation protocols? Can you see there's a bullet point a little lower down, evacuation protocols for the building, such as a stay-put policy, phased or full evacuation. Please see approved document B. I won't ask you about that. But in terms of evacuation protocols for the building, on your visit, did you make an assessment of what those evacuation protocols for Grenfell Tower were?
I can't recall I did, no.
No. It does. This policy does say, please see approved document B, paragraph 427. I've got to ask this question, really. Have you ever heard of approved document B?
No.
No. Location, well, evacuation protocols. On the subject of evacuation, when you did your visit, did you find out what the standing advice to residents was in the case of a fire?
I may have done. I can't recall that. With the interaction I had with the contracts from Ryden, that could have been covered, but there's something I can't recall, unfortunately.
No. Can I ask you to look at a document? It's a photograph in bundle tab 12, the documents bundle, and this is a photograph. Its reference is BLA 00002416, and it's taken by our expert in this inquiry, Barbara Lane, Dr. Barbara Lane, and it's a photograph taken from between the lifts within Grenfell Tower after the fire. Is this familiar?
That particular document isn't familiar. However, I have seen that is a fairly common feature within high-rise blocks, particularly if it's managed by a local authority, and that usually will be in the lobby areas at lifts to inform obviously residents of what's doing in the event of a fire.
Right. Did you see this sign or something like it on your 2016 visit?
I can't honestly say I recall seeing that.
Okay. Let's just look at the advice. It says in the middle, if you are safely within your block and there is a fire elsewhere in the block, it says you should initially be safe to stay in your flat keeping the doors and windows closed. On arrival, the fire brigade will make an assessment and will assist with evacuation if required. In your experience, was that advice normal advice to give to residents in a high-rise block?
Yes.
It is. Did you investigate on your visit what else, if anything, the building owner had done to ensure that its residents understood what to do in the event of a fire?
I can't recall if that conversation took place, no.
Did you investigate whether there were persons in the block whose command of English might obstruct their understanding of that advice?
I can't recall.
Did you investigate whether there were children in the block who might need help in the event of a need to evacuate?
No.
Did you investigate whether there were any elderly people within the block who might need help getting out?
No.
And what about people with mobility challenges or children?
Not far I can remember, no.
During your visits, did you or your team you were with give any particular advice to the residents you found there about evacuation?
Not that I can recall, because my understanding the building was still in its refurbishment stage, so I don't remember interacting or speaking with any residents, no.
All right, okay. Can I ask you to go back to the shopping list on page 16 of the GRA, please? And look at the next item down, location, control and status of any fixed installation of fire suppression systems and facilities provided for the fire and rescue authorities such as firefighting shafts, rising mains and ventilation systems. To the best of your recollection, Mr. Dowden, do you remember looking at any of those matters or those things on your visit in February 16?
That was something we looked at because the purpose of the visit in detailing the extension of the dry riser, and obviously it was explained to us about the smoke extract system, how it operated. Yes, yes, we did.
Did you ask any? Did you look first of all at the doors between the protected stair and the lobbies?
I can't recall that happened, no.
So you did. Am I right in thinking that you didn't ask anybody about the fire rating for those doors?
No. I mean, the expectation is they should be 60-minute fire rated doors, but I can't remember if that conversation, or had that conversation or asked that question, no.
And what about the doors, the front doors of the flats, leading out from the individual flats in Grenfell Tower to the lobbies? Did you ask about how those were fire rated?
I can't recall, no.
There we go. looking at the next bullet point down, location, control and status of any fixed installations. Sorry, we looked at that. The layout and compartmentalisation and size of the building, including specific features such as atria or security features such as grills or reinforced doors. I'm interested in layout, compartmentalisation and size of the building. On your visit in February 2016, did you look and gather information about that?
I think, I can't be sure of this because obviously we do have a number of high-rise blocks on North Kensington's ground, so I think there was a conversation in terms of how to access the main entrance into Grenfell Tower. I can't be specific if it was on that visit or if it's something that we generally would ask on a familiarisation to a high-rise block, because obviously it's secure access because it's a residential block, and generally in terms of security features, and this isn't generally specific just to Grenfell Tower. Our access will be by what we call an express key, so that allows firefighters to override that and enter a high-rise premise or a secure residential premise.
Yes, yes. I'm going to come back to that. An express key, is that like the drop key?
A drop key, yes.
Drop key. I'll come back to the drop key shortly, but while I'm still on this list, I'll just stick to it. Just a couple down, you see effectiveness of communications and identification of any radio blind spots. Did you, on your visit, did you look at that?
Again, I can't recall that's something that happened, no.
No. Next one, building construction features such as the presence and location of maisonette-style construction, sandwich panels, timber framing, cladding systems, surface-mounted trunking, ducting and voids, in addition to features which present a specific hazard such as asbestos. Now that's a fairly long list of things that you're required to look at in relation to building construction features. The question is, when you went on your 7.2D visit in February 2016, did you look at building construction features generally, first of all?
Again, that's something I can't recall, no.
What about...
How are you getting on with the list?
I'm going to ask about sandwich panels and cladding systems.
Is that going to be the last bit for
Yes.
the moment?
Yes.
Because I think the witness might welcome another break.
Very well. These are quite important questions, Mr. Chairman.
Of course.
So
well, would you
perhaps
rather break now
break
for lunch and come back?
Let's break now. Mr. Dowden, I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of a question, but I think it's probably right that you have a break. We all have a break. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm in your hands.
Right, well, in that case, we'll stop for lunch now. We'll resume at 2:15, which is slightly longer lunch hour than usual, but you've all been sitting there for quite a long time. And Mr. Dowden, just remember what I said earlier. Don't talk about the matters to which you're giving evidence or the inquiry or anything else. You might want to talk about the football or anything, something like that instead. All right? 2:15 then, please.